2013 meeting of the Canby Planning Commission. Today we have two particular items of business for public hearings. First, we will call the meeting to order. We have everyone in attendance tonight. 6 of the 7 seats are filled. All 6 are here. Is there any citizen input on non-agenda items? Not seeing any citizen input on non-agenda items. We will go next to the first public hearing of the night. The first public hearing of the night is it's not a continuation. Is a public hearing to consider approval of a site design review and major variance type 3 to build a new city library to be located at 162 Northwest 2nd Avenue in the C1 Downtown Commercial Core Commercial sub-area of the Downtown Overlay Zone, DR 13-01, combined with variance 1301. Does anyone have an objection to me clarifying that this is not a continuation, unless I missed
well,
some
it's
period
only
of
a
time?
continuation in that since there wasn't a quorum at the advertised meeting date, it technically was a continuation from those that might have been following, and since we advertised for the previous date, so.
Okay. So we didn't open a public hearing. I would
No, we did
say
not.
it was not a continuation. Okay, that's fine. Just wanted to clarify there, see if I missed a meeting.
Did I miss something?
So, public hearing format. The matter presented before, this is obviously a very unique situation because the applicant is the city. Well, please, I'll go through these things even though the city is here listening, presumably. The matter presented before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please step forward to the microphone when it's your turn. State your name, address, your interest in the matter. You may be limited by time for your statement, depending on how many people wish to testify. Can we get a quick show of hands of people that plan to testify? Nobody plans to testify. Meeting, oh wait, no, just kidding. No one plans to testify, at least at this time. Okay, so we won't have to limit it up front. Public hearing will be conducted. First, we'll have a staff report. Then we'll have commission questions for staff. Open public hearing for any testimony. First will be the applicant, then any other proponents, then opponents, and then rebuttal by the applicant. Then we'll close the public hearing and ask any questions or discuss amongst the commission. Questions should be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access to be made available to the public. All written testimony previously received both for and against the application shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable approval criteria listed on the wall and on page 2 of the staff report or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations for which the person believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and interested parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. At this time, I would like to ask any member of the commission who has a conflict of interest, please raise the microphone one at a time if you have one, and we'll want to hear the nature and extent of any conflicts, and whether you intend to participate or abstain from hearing in the present matter. Is there anyone that has a conflict of interest?
No conflict.
No conflict.
No conflict.
Again, to the commission, is there anyone in the audience, or is anyone in the audience that has questions of anyone who, never mind, no one indicated a conflict. Also, is there any member of the commission that has had any ex parte contacts with anyone prior to this hearing? Please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. I have had ex parte contacts about this. I have talked with Planning Director Brian, and I have also, people in the community have asked me if this was going to be on our agenda. When it was canceled last time, I had at least probably 2 questions from people, what happened or if it was heard, but none of those related to the substance of this. Did have a conversation with Commissioner Commissioner Hensley prior to even knowing this was on there, just about the library in general, before this was on our docket about the library. But that's the extent of my conversations in the community about this.
I too had conversations with Commissioner Hensley before this was on our agenda, and but I have no conflicts.
I have no conflicts.
This is ex parte communication, so this is different than conflicts, just so everybody's clear. We're thinking about this different than conflicts. This is ex parte communications. They're not banned, they just need to be put on the record so that everybody knows what the decisions, any facts or things that the decision's being made upon.
I spoke with Mr. Smith and Mr. Savory about this, whether or not this was coming to us and when, and before it actually was on our agenda.
Okay. Okay, with that, we will move to the staff report.
Okay, good evening.
Angie, are you gonna, okay?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Tonight, before we have a site and design review variance application for the proposed new city library. The applicant, the owner, for purposes of this application, I'm referring to the applicant as the city's hired architect, FFA Architecture. So when I refer to the applicant, that's who I'm going to be referring to for purposes of tonight, even though it is a city project. This is a quasi-judicial type 3 application for variance and site and design review. Another note, our recent code amendments, at the time of this application, they hadn't gone into effect yet, but I didn't find anything during my review that would affect, but just note that this is being reviewed under the old code. The proposed development includes a new 22,600 square foot library and renovation to the existing city hall, which would make the total square foot of the new city hall, council chambers, and library to be about 25,700 square feet. The entire square footage of the subject tax lots that this project is proposed on is, which on your screen here, these are the 4 tax lots. This total area is 30,450 square feet. To make way for the new structure, Canby City Hall, and the Canby Area Transit Building and Tax Lot 6200 here will have to be removed, as well as the Canby Planning Building, Tax Lot 6300 here will have to be removed, and the adjacent parking area, Tax Lot 6100, is also a subject property. We'll discuss more about the property ownership in a while, but just know that the city owns, at this point on the tax rolls, the city owns tax lot 600 and 6200, and on the tax rolls, 6300 is listed as Canby Urban Renewal Agency, and 6100, the parking lot, is Canby Utility Board. So it's located where we sit now, between Holly and Ivy along 2nd. It is zoned C1 downtown commercial. It's in the core commercial sub-area of the downtown overlay zone. And as said before, the applicant is FFA Architecture, represented by Eric Wilcox. The file for the record is on the dais, as well as larger printed out plans. We had a few extras, so those are laying there, up there too, if you want to refer to them as we go along. So I'm just going to go over a couple of, again, as I've done before, there's a few notable items from the staff report, and then we'll go over the conditions of approval, and then as I go along, feel free to ask questions. So go ahead and start. So this proposal is located in the C1 zone. So this is the downtown zone. No off-street parking is required in the downtown zone. For purposes of this application, since the applicant's design and negotiations of ownership of the parking areas to the south are not clear yet. All the plans, the parking areas are shown for reference, but they're not part of this design review because parking is not, and that's okay because parking is not required in the downtown zone. So it's one item worth noting. You should have in your packets written testimony from Canby Utility Board and the city administrator regarding the property ownership issue, which I'll discuss more in a minute. We have received no other written testimony. So a couple of interpretations here that I'm going to read over. There's some loading berth number and size requirements in the code. We're asking that the commission exempts loading berth number and size requirements. Large loading berths are not needed for a library. And there was a question in Canby Utility Board's written testimony about the location of the proposed loading area, and I did speak with the applicant today, and it is over here by the proposed trash recycling area. It's not along the book drop. There's an entry door next to the book drop area, but for purposes of the application and as functionality, loading is going to be directed not in the middle of the driveway, but towards the trash recycling area in the corner, away from cars driving in and out to the book stop. So
Angie,
Yes.
I just want a point of clarification, I guess for me, because I kind of got confused when I was reading up on this. So it says that we're asking, or that they're asking to waive the loading dock requirement in size, but we're putting a loading dock in. I mean,
well, it's not a loading,
size.
it's a loading, I guess I'm calling it a loading area because there's big doors, and then the architect could probably get more into specific, there's going to be a ramp, I believe, but it's not a loading berth.
Okay, so all the specific requirements that come with the loading berth is what we're looking for.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's just a large loading berth like that is just not needed for a
Have the
library.
length of a normal.
There's dimensional.
That was the question I had, is that it says, hey, we're asking to waive it, but then because it only needs one,
Okay.
but then they're putting one in, so I didn't really, I was making
Okay.
sure it was the
Well,
size
they're-
that we're talking about is the problem.
The size.
Okay.
So the size, loading,
I'm clear now.
okay. We could call it a berth, or we could call it two big doors, but it's
I'm good.
just
I
the
just wanted to make
size.
sure I understood
Okay.
without a doubt, so.
The trash and recycling area, when I was reviewing this, is located on, this dashed here is on the property line. So, and then there's some requirements of the code to have, screen the trash and loading area, and that's actually on this southern lot that's not part of this design review. But they are screening it, it's just not within this lot that we're supposed to be confining this application to. So I am going to recommend, just for clarification, because this down here could still be redesigned It's probably pretty close to final designs, but we just want to make sure that this landscaping island for screening the trash and recycling area stays. So I recommend just adding that as a condition of approval, just to clarify that that needs to stay there. And this lot here is owned by the city, so I don't think it'll be a problem, but it just, this is the property line here. To note in the staff report, in the conditions of approval, there are several code requirements for designs of parking lots concerning landscaping, lighting, stall dimensions, access width, accessible parking, stalls, frontages, etc. And the code does say that a parking lot can be reviewed under a Type 1 administrative process. So that is also in the conditions of approval too. When these designs for the parking lot are final, they'll go to staff for planning director administrative Type 1 approval. And then Clackamas County will have to work out that, but Clackamas County does review to make sure the accessible parking areas are all state code, accessible parking area code requirements are met.
When does Clackamas County?
Because they do our building permits, and so that's something that's reviewed with building permits. The city traffic engineer did review, even though we're not considering the parking lots to the south as part of the application, our traffic engineer did review the whole site and recommended some conditions of approval to improve site circulation. Let's see, point table in 1622, this is 1617 of your packet. Had several discretionary type items to it. About materials, colors, parapet, roof treatment, window coverage, public art points. There's just a lot of discretionary type assignments of point values there. I can go over it in more detail, but if the planning page 16 and 17, I'm sorry.
Let me rewind you for 1 second again. Going back to page 7, you wrote in here the proposed findings, the library may be sharing the accesses with Canby Utility Board. Can you show me which one that is? I thought if this was approved and there was ultimately a transfer of property, that it would all be owned.
Well, there's the new access is proposed right here. So Canby Utility would may be using this access as well as the city.
Okay.
So. Okay. So back at the point table, that was, I can go over that some more, but a lot of discretionary type items, assignments there. Floor area ratio calculations, there's a conflicting definition in our code, in our off-street parking chapter, and then if you look in the definitions chapter, it conflicts to whether you are supposed to include the parking lots or not. Normally you would just include whatever's on the site, and that would include parking lots. But that would something that would need to be fixed in future code revisions. But since this application does not include the parking lots, then the floor area ratio calculation is met. And then to calculate the floor area ratio, we included the entire site, which would be the city hall, council chambers, and the new library site. Take that divided by the entire site's area to get the floor area ratio, and if that's the way you calculate it, then that's met.
What does that come up to be, Angie?
I might have put it in the codes. Did I write it in the stuff?
I remember that somewhere.
I believe it's .8 something.
And you're factoring in also the city hall?
Yes.
Where are we using that piece also?
Because it's the entire site. It's the entire project.
It's all one continuous building, correct?
Yes. I can dig through my stuff. Ryan, could you maybe try to find that number?
Look, if you think it's in
Okay.
there somewhere.
Let me keep going here, and then we can come back to what that actual number is. I believe or the applicant probably knows too, so.
No, it's about .844.
Okay.
So it's over this .8 or.
And I think the requirement is,
They just said it was .8.
requirement's .8.
Yeah.
So, and then there's also many discretionary items concerning the design standards in 1641, which the planning commission that has the discretion to approve alternative designs to meet the intent of the design standards in 1641. Stuff like screening details, window coverage details, architectural bay number details, roof materials, building materials, colors, base, middle, top of buildings, roof slope, building corner design, seating, awnings. These are all stuff that are in 1641, and the applicant proposes several alternative designs to meet the intent of these standards in 1641, so those are detailed also in the staff report.
Angie, from what you know, on these, I'm sure they'll go through it, but do you know, before the applicant goes through it, is any portion of this design actually 2 floors?
No.
So are they asking for a variance on the 2-floor requirement in 1641, or how's that being dealt with? I couldn't figure that out.
With calculating the floor area ratio, you mean?
No, the requirement for two floors in 1641, I don't know what it says,
Yeah, I'm not aware of any specific requirement
Yeah,
for a
it's-
2-story building.
It does state 164110A. It states that you're required to have 2 floors.
The proposed FAR in conjunction with the maximum lot coverage ensures the development will be a minimum of 2 floors along the street in the C1 portion of the core commercial area. I was wondering if that was, how that was dealt with, or what was the situation with that?
Can you cite that number again?
1641-010A, and then the last sentence in A is where it says it.
Okay. Well, that's a purpose statement, so,
If you don't know, I'll ask the applicant. I was just wondering if you know how it had been dealt with in this thing. You don't need to speculate.
it's been dealt with through, I guess, a series of community meetings prior to this meeting.
Our experience in applying that since this downtown overlay district ordinance was set is what Angie said, it's in a purpose statement. It's not an actual standard because it's in the purpose statement. It's an implied, and we've used that, and we've said that all along in this project, that if you can't meet the actual ordinance standard, which is the floor area ratio, then the implication is that usually a floor area ratio forces you to build a two-story building. But in reality, and that's the intent of the floor area ratio, is to funnel projects into building a two-story, but the actual standard, if it can be met, doesn't actually turn into a two-story building in every case. And so that's how we've been applying it in the past. We tell people you're likely going to have to do a two-story building, but in this particular case, they were able to meet the standard without doing that.
And one other thing, the original, you have the revised plans in front of you, but the original plans called for the primary material to be terracotta, and that's still reflected in the applicant's narrative, that the original main material would be terracotta, and they revised that in the drawings, but not in the narrative, to have the primary material be brick veneer. And I think the applicant could talk more about that, but it's for cost purposes. The brick veneer is now proposed as the primary material. One other thing, the hose tower sign, the sign code limits the secondary building frontage to, it's about 42 square feet, and our sign code says secondary building frontage to be 30 square feet. You know, this is okay, we'll call it okay with the planning commission, or you could require them to shrink the sign down to 30 square feet. We're talking about this sign along the hose tower. I think the intent is to see it, be able to see it from the highway, so. Variance criteria, okay, so the variance application. They're requesting a variance from the 7.5% landscaping standard. There's approximately 450 square feet of landscaping proposed, and they would need approximately 2,300 square feet of landscaping to meet the 7.5% requirement. Basically, these are the variance review criteria are on page 45 of your packet, and they're also up on the slide here. But I think the main argument is there's just not enough room to have that landscaping. So I think the architect could go into more details of how they squeezed every inch of space they could to try to get enough landscaping in, but that's a variance that is requested. I just got a couple of slides here that we can go and refer to if we need to. And then, so, let's see, if you go to page 46 of your packet, I start with the conditions of approval, and they're pretty standard. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. They contain the traffic engineer's recommended conditions. Let's see, condition regarding the new access along Holly, and just giving the copies any access easements between the city and Canby Utility Board. Bicycle rack layout condition, signage condition regarding a proposed city seal sign that's not noted on the plans, just to make sure that that falls in the overall required square footage for signs. Canopy and signage lighting condition, landscaping standard condition on maintenance and installation. The parking lot type 1 procedure condition, and then I would say add to that condition that Canby Utility Board be notified before, when staff, when NF staff is making a type 1 administrative review of the parking lot. We did put the property owner, condition number 12. That's been requested by Canby Utility Board in their written testimony to move that under procedural conditions, and we can certainly do that for clarification, but it just basically states that our code does state that the applicant should provide written signature from all owners of involved tax lots, and we didn't get one tax lot owner signature. And so because of that, we put that as a condition of approval. It's going to have to get property owner's permission before anything is built on anything. So that would be something that would have to be obtained prior to building anything, and you're not going to build on somebody else's property. So, but that's what that condition is for, to address that. And then I would also like to add that condition about the trash and recycling area. Make sure that that's screened with landscaping per 1641-050. With that concludes, my overview of the staff report, and I can go into any more details if you'd like me to go into more details.
One question, did the applicant request that as a condition of approval, the transfer of the property, or was that something that we thought of, staff thought of just on this process? Because I have questions, I'm not sure who to ask about how that came about.
Just going through the code, the code requires owner signature, so.
The reason I ask, maybe it was you guys, I can understand why it might be in there going through the code, but when I'm looking at this from a land use attorney's perspective, I'm wondering, okay, so would the city of Canby here be setting a precedent that anybody in the city can come in to the planning commission and say, I want to get a variance, I want to get a conditional use permit for that guy's property over there. Fine, throw a condition on there that I have to buy it from him before I can actually do it. But let's see what I can get approved before I go about doing it. And so I'm wondering how this came about, and why this would be different in this scenario. As far as asking who came up with this idea to.
I guess in my mind, it's as you mentioned at the start of this hearing, that it's somewhat unique in that the city's the applicant. And then if you go a step further, Canby Utility is a quasi-city entity as well, in the fact that the city council has ultimate authority, and you have some written testimony in your packet from the city manager that indicates, that ultimate authority might be interpreted to mean that we have authority over the land as well, and so that maybe the city really does ultimately own this piece of land as well. And so there's enough gray area in the fact that we're the applicant and such, and the tie between the two entities, that it seems quite unique. We'll never experience this kind of application again, so I don't think it's precedent setting.
I was going to say, so since it is the city doing the proposal, shouldn't the city ensure that we are ensuring that we're following the letter of the law just as we would another applicant?
Yeah, in this case, our thought process was that we're on this very tight time frame trying to make a lot of different pieces fit together, and in order to keep the process moving along and recognizing that we're working with another entity that is tied with the city, that surely we're protected by indicating that nothing's going to happen until the ownership issue is resolved. And so it's a very practical approach. And I would agree that it's not one we'd like to do and on a frequent basis, and likely wouldn't do for a normal private property application. But I think the fact that this was a city application made it unique to begin with.
I'm sorry, I keep jumping in.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think that's actually why it needs to be so transparent, is because it is the city. I've sat on this board for about 4 years now, 5 years coming up, and we've had many of our opportunity where we pretty much have told applicants who were, well, I'm in a hurry, I'm on a timeline, it's financial constraints. It's like, well, here's the rules, you need to follow the rules, and then it won't take you as long. And I feel like we're not setting a legal precedent, I think we're setting a other precedent of sorts, in that we're saying, well, if the city's trying to push something through, we can follow our own rational thoughts and rules. Simply man looking at this from the outside, not a lawyer, I'm sitting here saying, if it was the city's property, then we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Agreed.
And I say that as a person who works for a quasi-governmental agency that has its own unique authority outside of the federal government. So, and we had these same discussions, and that's why I bring this up. I just have concerns in that we are setting precedents, and I'm not trying to get my thoughts and my arguments here. And I have trouble understanding why this is even an issue if the property is owned by the city. And that's why I come here looking for an answer to that one, to set my brain at ease as to why it's even an issue. And then I got another question once we get off this topic.
Well, what I understand about this is that Canby Utility is its own entity. It's owned by the people, not the city. It's part of the city, but it's owned by the people. And it is then governed by the people, by the city council, who's elected by the people. So it's still, to me, it keeps coming back to the public. It's not about the city. If the city owned it, like you said, if the city owned it, the city would already own it, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. So, from what I understand, Canby Utility is a piece of the city, but it's owned by the people, not owned by the city.
So for right now, let's, the commission if we want to ask questions of staff, we have two awesome, experienced staff people, so let's, at this time frame of the meeting, ask them questions, try and pick their brains, and then obviously we'll discuss it at the end. So the discussion can be somewhat limited unless it's a preface for a question. Let's pick their brains on questions if we want to go that route.
Isn't that the statement, though? I mean, I went on to Canby Utility's site. Is it not? How do you guys justify where Canby Utility sits?
Well, again, I'm not going to try to make a legal determination because I'm not a lawyer, but staff was definitely concerned from day one when the application was made, in that we did not have a signature from Canby Utility on this application. And that has been an issue from day one, and it's been discussed from day one. And we're here where we're at today because the negotiations, I guess, on making that a clearly city-owned piece of property hasn't transpired yet. And we're hoping that we can keep the process moving with this condition of approval that's placed in the staff report that clearly indicates that the approval isn't going to go anywhere if that doesn't get resolved. And that's what the condition of approval is for. That's in the report at this stage.
So I have a separate question.
Yeah, maybe we'll
To get
take
off
from
this.
this. No, keep all questions for staff.
No, I just said we wanted to get off that topic.
Staff report, right? So questions
It's
for you.
open for questions
I
at
just
this
didn't know if
point.
you have another question
I
on
do,
the
but
topic.
not on that one.
Okay. So, Angie, you stated that the parking layout not being a thing to analyze is okay since it's not required. But isn't that, I just have maybe you just misspoke and I'm just reading too much into your terms, but I think isn't that what we're here for, is to, if the parking lot's going to impact others and it is part of the project, would it not be something that would at least be discussed by this group here?
I mean, I think you're open to discuss it. I don't think that's, an issue. It's just the plans and what the applicant and the architect, that area is not, concrete concrete yet in its design, and it doesn't have to be because parking isn't required in the C1 zone, so that's how.
So from what
We
you're
looked at
saying,
it.
from what you can tell in the code in your review, there's no substantive requirement one way or the other at all on how the interior parking would be laid out. Is that accurate?
There is, parking lot landscaping and, lighting standards that could be reviewed. I mean, we have separate applications. I know Brian's had separate applications for someone just coming in, doing a parking lot,
Parking lot.
and he, type 1 administratively reviews them.
Okay.
But Canby Utility seems to have an issue with the parking, according to the letter from Matt Michael. He seems to think that there's not a sufficient number of off-street parking spaces for Canby Utility's exclusive use post-construction. So that seems to be an issue for Canby Utility, and since we haven't we don't have a signed off, anything signed off for the property from Canby Utility, it seems to me that we're putting the cart before the horse in some instances. Before we answer some of these questions, such as the parking issue.
Yeah, I would direct you back to the fact that the parking lot, no parking lot is required with this library design. And therefore, if a parking lot is going to be built somewhere, obviously off of this property, then there is a process to go through to build that parking lot. So in our thought process, at this stage, and when the application was made, the negotiations were not complete yet. We had no idea whether parking spaces were or were not going to be provided for Canby Utility. We didn't know where they were going to be provided or how many, and that isn't one of your review criterias on how many parking spaces are provided for Canby Utility, because you're reviewing a library application. And with that other condition of approval about nothing's going to happen unless prior to a building permit being issued, the number of the number of Canby Utility parking spaces obviously is a matter for the land swap negotiations. It's not really a matter of site and design review for a library that doesn't need any parking spaces. And so that's how staff has thought of it. The other issue is that the city parking lot that's east of Canby Utility is existing today. We don't really truly need to review that parking lot at all. It's there today. They are proposing to slightly restripe it, which anybody can do at any time. They don't even need a permit to do that. And they need that little bit of landscaping in the corner that Angie pointed out near the trash dumpster.
So it isn't part of our purview to see what kind of impact the park.
We did want you to see how it related to the new building, and it's the traffic circulation around the building, but it's really parking for other uses. Now, the library may get some parking spaces in that parking lot east of, but they may not. And so from that standpoint, some of the parking in that existing lot may or may not be for the library. And so would you be reviewing a parking lot for some other use?
Right.
Because we don't know at this point whether any of those parking spaces will be utilized by the library. Because that negotiation on making Canby Utility whole hasn't been completed yet. And the police building is currently planned to be demolished and a parking lot built there. That's where we said, hey, they should come in for a type 1 parking lot review so that we can see. And that's going to be, our understanding, owned by somebody else. That won't even be owned by the city. So whoever's going to own that property and build a parking lot should come in for a type 1 review when that's built. And we'll make sure that the dimensions of the spaces meet our ordinance requirements administratively, like we always do. So that's our thought process in this, and we would have preferred to have the whole package, but to be quite open and frank, we said, well, because of those reasons and the fact that it wasn't going to meet the landscaping ordinance requirement, they're going to need a variance regardless. We could meet the floor area ratio by excluding the parking lots.
I thought the parking lots were already excluded for the floor area ratio.
They
That's what it said.
are. They are. But we could have actually made them part of the entire application, but that confused the matter, just for the reasons I've explained to you. So I still think it was a better decision in recognition of the downtown doesn't require parking lots. And we're not sure if we're going to get a parking lot with this library or not. That we don't really consider that part.
The parking lot, if that you're showing there to the west, then that will actually then belong to the Canby Board, right? Utility Board?
That's our understanding at this point.
That's what you're swapping for? So then it would be, Canby Utility Board would have to bring in an application for that parking lot and meet all the specifications of a parking lot?
Right,
Is that right?
right.
So even if you tear it down, they can't do anything unless there's an application for a parking lot there.
That's what our
From the
condition of
Canby
approval
Utilities.
states.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that would be also the point of adding to the condition of approval about the parking lot, that Canby Utility Board be notified of a type 1 parking lot application so they can be included in staff's review of it.
So in other words, if Canby Utility doesn't approve all of this, then there's nothing going to happen. They have to make a final approval of doing the swap and the trade
Right.
and the parking lot and all this before you can start the library. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
That's correct.
Different question, because I'm curious about how this would work. Has there been any conversation, have you guys gotten any guidance on anybody on what would happen if, how is the council going to deal with this? Because they've obviously already voted on this. They've already expressed opinions on this. So how would the council deal with this as our appellate body?
So the council has not had any part and would not have any part in the site and design review application that's in front of you today. You are the final decision body for the site and design review.
So they wouldn't have any appeal authority in this because
And,
they've already participated?
A person with standing or even a council can appeal the decision you make tonight, as in any application. They have the ability to do that.
But then it
If-
would be heard before council as the appeal body.
Right.
That's your
That's
question?
my question,
Yeah.
because they've already weighed in on this. This is their decision, essentially, that we're reviewing tonight. And so then, is what we're doing here, this, I don't mean to phrase it this way, but is what we're doing here meaningful if they are the appellate body and can simply just overrule us when they've already made the lower decision and they would make the appeal decision? And I'm wondering if you guys had gotten any advice or put any thought to that or have any answers. I don't have the answer right now. It's an interesting conundrum,
Yeah.
but I want to
I
hear
mean,
your
my
feedback.
guess is that they would just review it as you're reviewing it tonight and vote on it again. I mean, that's how I would think it would happen,
They have the same criteria. I guess I'm still
even though they've
confused.
talked about it already, but they talk about it again.
Okay, okay. We'll go ask the applicant. Okay, anything else for staff? Angie, did you have anything else? I know you weren't totally, completely done.
No, I was,
Okay.
I'll open it up for questions, and so
Okay,
that's,
well, with that, let's move on to the applicant. We have, I believe, the architect.
I'm Troy Ainsworth, principal with FFA Architecture and Interiors, and I'll just have a few opening comments, and then I'll have Carl from our firm do an overview of the design for you. I just wanted to note that it was about 3.5 years ago that our firm started working with the City of Canby, with Penny Hummel, planning this library. And it's gone through a number of iterations since to arrive at where we are today. And we're excited to get it to this point, as it's a kind of a transformational project for downtown Canby. And we're excited to see it go forward. The extent of the project that's being proposed is required to meet the program for the library. And so it's a bit of a tight fit, as has been noted. The program for the library, the requirements, have gone through several iterations as well over the last 3 years, and were most recently updated last summer. We started on the schematic design phase working with our core team from the city in December of 2012. And we have gone through 3 public meetings in the interim. We meet with our core planning group that includes folks from the library, the city, the construction manager, and now the construction manager, general contractor, or the contractor, are all at the table to help us plan this new facility. And we meet on average, about every 3 weeks. We had an extensive public input process. In January and February, we hosted 3 public meetings here in Canby that were very, very well attended. And we had a lot of positive feedback, input, lots of input and comments. We solicited comments in the meetings. We had written comments. We encouraged the staff to give us comment. And the proposal you see here very much reflects a lot of the preferences and input that the public and staff provided for us along the way.
Mr. Ainsworth, can I interrupt you for 1 moment?
Yes.
Were those, you mentioned those meetings, and I was not a participant in those meetings, don't know if they actually happened or not, so I'm just curious. The January and February meetings, were those neighborhood meetings as required under our code, Chapter 16, 89050? Was that what those were, or were those different meetings?
I don't actually know what they were considered.
Okay. I don't know.
They were community meetings. They were open to the community since the library, and I'm Eric Wilcox, I'm project manager for the project. They're open to the community since the library serves the entire community, not a specific neighborhood, so to speak. They were open to the entire community, and I believe they're attended by members of the entire community.
Yeah, the community meetings, certainly by staff, were considered far superior than the neighborhood meetings because they were broader and more inclusive than a neighborhood meeting. They involved the entire community. And there wasn't just one, there were 3.
So just to wrap my intro piece here, as I noted, comments were very supportive, very positive, and helped us focus the direction for the design of the project. And now I'd like to have Carl Rafey, the lead designer for FFA, the FFA team, to expand a little bit on specifically how the design responds to the downtown requirements.
Thank you, Troy. Again, I am Carl Rafey with FFA Architecture and Interiors. And you guys, since you guys all have the 2-dimensional printed drawings on your desk, I just wanted to spend a few minutes quickly walking around the exterior of the building using the computer model. Hope to give you a better feel for how everything sort of fits together. From the very beginning, we understood with this project that the challenge before us, where we were essentially designing half a block downtown, and the need to address a building of 23,000 plus or minus square feet in a way such that it respects the scale and character of downtown Canby. It respects the goals set forth in the downtown overlay, as well as cues off of and respects the historic nature and qualities of the historic City Hall, which is to be preserved. So the scheme we've come up with, which is before you, breaks down our new addition into a series of smaller volumes of varying material and height in a way that, using the existing City Hall to be retained as a jumping-off point, our building gradually will step up from. And cueing off of the materiality of the brick masonry building to be preserved, we introduce similarly scaled volumes of brick, which are alternated with more glassy, transparent elements, so that we're not dealing with one long mass of all brick building or all glass building, but we are alternating with things that respect the more civic, the more masonry precedent of the City Hall, and have other elements that address more commercial elements and two-story elements that are also seen commonly downtown. So we were trying to work between these forces to create the right fit for downtown Canby. So I'll just sort of go facade by facade around the building for you. The existing City Hall really set the height for this new common entry plaza and lobby, which is mostly glass. And the City Hall, which is to be retained, the brick wall will actually move past the glass and become a feature wall within the lobby itself. So that eave line sets the lower eave here that we step up from. The next piece, then clad in brick, and also featuring large glass walls for the multi-purpose rooms, features gallery space, the multi-purpose rooms, and has staff spaces at the back. The parapet condition there also helps to serve as a screen wall for some of the mechanical elements. We step up again to the main library volume, the stack space, or the reading room, as you may call it. And what we found is that, yes, to answer one of the questions that was asked early on, this is a one-story building, and we find that libraries of this size really need to be one-story for a functional efficiency all around. There's really a tipping point, and it's not until something like 60,000 square feet that two-story lobbies are really feasible. However, inherent in the nature of a library design, the need for large, open, flexible spaces with a lot of natural light really command and warrant two-story volumes be utilized primarily in their reading spaces. So it was natural for us to go up again, bring the height of the roof up again a little higher here to this facade.
Rafi, can I pause you for 1 second? You said the need for large, open space, natural lights, something along that lines. Where's that need derived for, or what do you, pardon me for not speaking architecture. What are you talking about? In the library reading room stacks, where all the books are on cases, and it's interspersed with lots of tables and chairs, and there'll be lounge areas and everything else. Really, that is really one large open space, and we free span it without columns, right, so that we can have the ultimate flexibility for the future and for now. And being able to take advantage of daylight as much as possible, as well as the flexibility of the space, we find that really does not lend itself to a 9 or 10-foot ceiling. For it to feel right and be a space that people will feel welcoming and comfortable being in, it really needs more volume. Okay.
So that element is expressed on the north elevation of the building as this two-story storefront facade with integrated